Channel message.
Some people are not struggling to move on because they love you. They are struggling because your life did not confirm the story they accepted, repeated, or helped create about you. They expected you to remain where they believe you belonged, reduced, discredited, ashamed, dependent, spiritually defeated. They believe your most difficult season had revealed your permanent identity. Instead, it revealed theirs, because some people do not merely misunderstand what was happening. They knew enough. They saw enough. They understood that something was deeply wrong, yet still chose the side that gave them belonging, entertainment, social approval, access, superiority, or protection from having to think independently. Some watched what was happening and remained comfortable. Some participated. Some carried information. Some repeated stories they had never verified. Some treated your distress like conversation material. Some enjoyed believing you had finally been brought down to the position they had privately assigned you. That was not confusion alone. That was a decision, and decisions reveal character. There is a difference between someone failing to respond perfectly and someone finding comfort in your deterioration. There is a difference between being uncertain about what happened and using that uncertainty as permission to treat you as disposable. There's a difference between lacking information and lacking humanity. Once a person has shown you that your distress could become their entertainment, their validation, or their opportunity to feel superior, the relationship does not simply return to what it was. Something essential has been revealed. Not about your worth, about their capacity to love you. People often want to call these situations misunderstandings after the consequences arrive. They want to reduce deliberate choices to confusion. They want to rename cowardice as being caught in the middle. They want to describe participation as staying neutral. They want to say they didn't know what to believe, even when they never extended enough concern to ask you directly. But neutrality does not look like joining conversations that degrade someone. Confusion does not require cruelty. Fear does not force a person to enjoy another human being's collapse. And uncertainty does not explain why some people become more comfortable as your life becomes more difficult. Whatever love may have existed before that season did not survive what they willingly became during it. That is the part they may not understand. The relationship did not end simply because you became angry. It ended because their choices permanently changed what you knew about them. You saw how they behaved when they believed you had no influence. You saw what they permitted when defending you offered no social reward. You saw whether their religious beliefs produced compassion or judgment, whether their spirituality created discernment or arrogance, whether their claimed values remained intact when collective opinion gave them permission to abandon those values. You saw who they were when they believed there would never be a consequence. And what they revealed cannot be returned to ignorance. You cannot unknow a person. You cannot restore innocence to a relationship after seeing what someone was willing to become when your humanity became inconvenient. But what they may never realize is that you did not stop caring immediately. You considered possibilities their conduct did not necessarily deserve. You wondered whether they were afraid, whether they were manipulated, whether they confused about what they had heard, whether family pressure, religious conditioning, social loyalty, or their need for approval had made them too weak to think independently. You made room for immaturity. You made room for ignorance. You made room for fear. You made room for the possibility that one day they would develop a conscience, grow a heart, find some courage, and see through what had been placed in front of them. For a while, you still expected someone to reach out. Not necessarily to rescue you, not even to repair everything. You hoped someone would ask a real question. Someone would recognize that you existed beyond whatever they had been told. Someone who would remember the relationship strongly enough to investigate before condemning the person inside of it. You waited. You waited longer than they would ever know. You forgave things they never acknowledged. You explained their silence to yourself in a kind language that it did not deserve. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they were frightened. Maybe they were protecting themselves. Maybe they will understand later. Maybe one day their conscience will become louder than their cowardice. Your empathy gave them extensions they never requested in real life. It preserved possibilities that their behavior kept disproving. But eventually, you had to stop allowing your empathy to rob people of the consequences of their actions. Understanding why someone failed you does not make the failure disappear. Their fear may be real. They still chose silence. Their confusion may have been real. They still chose not to ask. Their conditioning may have influenced them. They still allowed that conditioning to decide how much humanity you deserve. Their desire to belong may explain why they followed the crowd. It does not restore the relationship they sacrificed to remain accepted by it. Reasons are not immunity. Empathy is not an eraser. You can understand what shaped a person without pretending they were powerless over every decision they made. You can recognize their insecurity, weakness, prejudice, need for approval, or spiritual immaturity without volunteering to continue experiencing the results of it. At some point, empathy without discernment becomes self-betrayal. You begin using your emotional intelligence to defend people who never used theirs to consider you. You become so skilled at finding the fear beneath their behavior that you stop acknowledging what they chose to do with that fear. You make room for their childhood, their family system, their religious beliefs, their insecurity, their emotional limitations. Meanwhile, nobody is required to make room for what their decisions cost you. It's not compassion. That is an unequal arrangement in which your humanity continues protecting theirs while theirs remains unavailable to you. They may have been too afraid to call. Now they have to live with the fact that they did not call. They may have been too weak to question the narrative. Now they have to live with the relationship that disappeared because they chose not to question it. They may have believed they were protecting themselves. Now they have to accept the fact that self-protection came at the cost of knowing you. You do not have to rescue them from that realization. You do not have to return so they can feel less guilty. You do not have to soften the outcome so they can continue believing that understandable behavior should also be consequence-free. No, you are not punishing them. You have stopped interfering with the natural conclusion of what they chose. That is the difference. Eventually, you stopped waiting. You stopped expecting a call. You stopped imagining the conversation in which they finally admitted they had been wronged. You stopped wondering when they would grow some balls, develop a heart, or become courageous enough to confront what they participated in. You stopped waiting for people who had repeatedly chosen comfort over character to become brave enough on your behalf. That was the end of false hope. Expectation had been the final chord. As long as part of you still wondered whether they would return, apologize, defend you, or finally understand, part of your spirit remained turned towards them. Waiting kept the connection alive. Not because the relationship was still functioning, but because some part of you was preserving the possibility that it might one day become something different. When you stopped expecting their transformation, the remaining attachment weakened. The energy you had reserved for their return came back to you. The door did not close through revenge. It closed through acceptance. You no longer needed them to become better people in order for you to become free. You no longer needed their remorse to confirm what their absence had already made clear. You stop carrying the version of them you hoped would eventually emerge. You stop keeping their place warm inside your memories. You stop remaining spiritually available to people who had chosen to be absent when the relationship required something real from them. They taught you how to live without them. Then they became uncomfortable when you learned the lesson completely. That may be the part of what they feel now, not your physical absence, the removal of your spiritual availability. The connection does not feel the same because it is no longer the same. It no longer exists in the same form. You are no longer reaching for them unconsciously. You are no longer calling them forward through expectation. You are no longer rehearsing their importance or remembering them with tenderness simply because tenderness once existed. If they cannot dream you clearly, remember you sweetly, or feel your presence the way they once assumed they always would, that may be because you finally stopped feeding the bond. If the memories have faded, the warmth has disappeared, or you now feel unreachable, that is not an accident. That was a release. They were not there. Eventually, neither were you. And by the time they noticed what was gone, you had already stopped expecting them to notice anything. Now, they have another consequence to confront. You did not remain where they left you. You moved beyond their prediction. You became more discerning, capable, more spiritually grounded, and more certain of yourself. You built a life outside of the reality they tried to establish around you. Your elevation did not create a conflict inside of them. It exposed one that was already there. They had decided who you were. Life revealed something different. They treated temporary distress as evidence of permanent inferiority. Then, you became proof that their judgment had been contaminated by something they did not want to examine. Bias, prejudice, jealousy, group loyalty, religious arrogance, spiritual pride, social advantage. The need to believe that their comfort was evidence of righteousness and your difficulty was evidence of personal failure. Your life disrupted that interpretation. Now they have to consider that what they call discernment may have been prejudice. What they call truth may have been gossip reinforced by collective bias. What they called accountability may have been humiliation. What they called concern may have been surveillance. What they called divine order may have been hierarchy protecting itself. And what they call spiritual warfare may have been their own participation in another person's oppression. That reckoning threatens more than their opinion of you. It threatens the identity they built around being good, righteous, perceptive, spiritually mature, or morally superior, because admitting they were wrong about you would require them to ask, why was I so willing to believe the worst? Why did that version of the story satisfy something inside of me? Why did another person's distress make me feel secure, validated, entertained, or above them? Why did I extend compassion selectively? Why did my faith make room for judgment more easily than humanity? Why was I comfortable with conduct that violated the very principles I claim to represent? Those questions belong to them. Their inability to answer them is not your problem. Their inability to move on is not evidence that a sacred relationship remains. Sometimes people cannot release the person they betrayed because that person carries the truth about them. Your existence reminds them of what they chose. Your progress reminds them that their judgment failed. Your absence confirms that access was never an entitlement. Your peace demonstrates that life continued without their approval. They may want your warmth because it would allow them to feel like good people again. They want your forgiveness to function as evidence that their conduct could not have been that serious. They may want reconciliation because restored familiarity will quiet the questions your absence keeps raising. But reconciliation is not a character reference. Your return would not transform their choices into innocence. Your empathy would not purify their intentions. Your presence would not correct the beliefs that made their conduct possible. And there is no love to return to simply because they are now uncomfortable. History is not love. Restlessness is not love. Missing access is not love. Feeling confronted by the loss of someone is not the same as valuing them when they were present. Some people do not want reconciliation because they have changed. They want it because the permanent loss of the relationship forces them to accept that something permanent happened. They want renewed contact to prove that the door was never truly closed. They want your familiarity to erase the severity of what they revealed. But there is nothing to reconcile when the relationship no longer exists inside of you. There is nothing waiting underneath the silence. There is no hidden tenderness being protected until the right apology arrives. There is no spiritual reunion suspended until they finally become honest. It's not there. You are not secretly hoping they grow. You are not checking whether they understand. You're not waiting for them to revise what they believe. You already extended understanding. You already considered their fear. You already forgave what you could forgive. You already waited for a conscience that never arrived while the relationship was still alive inside of you. Then you stop. That was the ending. They do not get to arrive after the burial and ask where the relationship went. They were present while it was dying. They participated in the conditions that killed it, or they stood close enough to witness it and chose not to move. Now they have to live with what exists after that choice. Nothing. Not hatred, not revenge, not secret longing, nothing to restore, no emotional place waiting to be reclaimed, no spiritual cord you intend to retie, no version of love willing to overlook what their character revealed. There are choices that permanently alter how another person knows you. There are revelations that cannot be talked back into innocence. There are relationships that do not end because forgiveness was impossible. They end because forgiveness arrived after reconciliation. Understanding arrived without renewed trust. Release arrived without restoration. You can forgive someone and still know there is no love left. You can release resentment and still refuse to revive what their choices destroyed. You can understand exactly why they became who they became and still decide you would never experience that version of them again. That is clarity, not cruelty. They can seek forgiveness from God without demanding familiarity from you. They can confront their biases without using your presence as proof that everything has been resolved. They can become accountable without receiving restoration. They can grow without being returned to your life that they forfeited. If their transformation depends on your availability, it is not a transformation. It is another demand. Let them confront what your life now reveals. Let them sit with the gap between who they claim to be and how they behave when they believe you had no power. Let them examine the religious, cultural, familiar, spiritual beliefs they used to justify withholding humanity. Let them decide whether they will become better people now that becoming better no longer grants them access to you. That work is theirs. You are not required to stand beside them while they do it. You already lived through the consequences of their choices. Now they must live with the consequence of losing you. Not temporarily. Not until they understand. Not until they apologize. Not until enough time has passed. They lost the version of you who still expected them to grow a conscience. They lost the version of you who explained their silence with compassion. They lost the part of you that remained spiritually available while hoping they would become someone different. They were absent while you still cared whether they returned. Now you are absent from the future, in which they assume you would always be waiting. There is no love simply because history exists. There is no reconciliation simply because they cannot move on. There is no relationship to revive because your elevation has made them uncomfortable with who they were. Their reckoning does not create an obligation for you. Their regret does not create the reconnection. Their inability to forget you does not require you to remember them sweetly. They have to live with who they were when you still cared. They have to live with who they failed to become while you were still waiting. They have to live with the consequences your empathy once protected them from. And they have to live with the fact that by the time they wanted to be remembered differently, there was no longer enough love, expectation, or spiritual attachment left inside of you to remember them at all.
End of message.